My dear friend,
Estimado amigo,
Mr. President
señor presidente
Myung-Bak,
Lee Myung-Bak,
it is indeed
Presidente Myung-Bak,
a great honor
un gran honor
to welcome you
poder darle la
Davos
bienvenida aquí en
at
Davos
the annual meeting today. I'm honored to have you here. As a friend, we have met several times, and I was always so impressed by your vision, first when you were the forward-looking mayor of Seoul, and now as the president, the first president of the Republic of Korea ever to attend the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. This year, of course, it's not only a pleasure to welcome you as the president of your country, a country which over the past 50 years has made so much economic progress. We should not forget that Korea, 50 years ago, was one of the poorest countries in the world. And look at the imagination, at the innovative capabilities of the Korean people in order to transform it what it is today, one of the leading countries and leading not only in economic but also in political and cultural terms. Your country has shown the resolve to overcome the greatest of challenges, the ability to transform yourself economically and politically, and the willingness to assume a global responsibility. Once again, under your leadership, Korea has rebounded quicker than many other developed G20 countries, even in the midst of the world's most severe global financial crisis. And in this critical year, and we have heard yesterday and this morning how many challenges we have to face, you have assumed the chairmanship of the G20. And as such, your presence here as the host of the G20 Summit later this year gives your presence a very special significance. Once again, we would like to welcome you very cordially here, and we are eager to hear your ideas as what will be the next priorities in the development of your country, and particularly what you see as the agenda and the priorities of the G20 under your chairmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the Republic of Korea.
여러분 아주 반갑습니다.
I'm very much glad to meet you.
오늘 세계적
Good morning. It is a great pleasure to address such a distinguished audience of world leaders at the World Economic Forum. I'm grateful to Professor Schwab and the organizers for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on the forthcoming G20 Summit to be held in Seoul in November of this year. I would like to thank you. Before starting on the main address, I would like to convey the heartfelt sympathies of all Koreans to the victims and survivors of the recent earthquake in Haiti. As an immediate measure, the Korean government is actively engaged in the flow of relief in concert with non-governmental bodies. Together with our summit colleagues in the G20, I will work on support and long-term reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just been through a very difficult time for the world economy. This time last year, you may recall that there was much pessimistic commentary on the possibility of an economic slump that would push the world into another Great Depression. Fortunately, the picture now is somewhat brighter than those worst predictions. The world economy has gone through a period of stabilization and is now showing some tentative signs of recovery. I believe that much of the credit for the better-than-expected outcome for the world economy should be given to the unprecedented level of policy cooperation among the advanced and emerging countries of the G20. The initial result shown in the first G20 Summit in Washington in November 2008 was followed up with swift and bold coordinated policy responses in successive summits in London and Pittsburgh. It was thanks to such bold action that the world economy pulled out from its free fall and managed to enter a period of stabilization. I do not doubt that the newfound status of the G20 as the premier forum for international economic cooperation owes much to its proven accomplishments to date. As the leader of the country that will chair the G20 this year, I'm keenly aware of the weight of responsibility in taking on such an important role. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an enormous privilege to chair the G20 together with all Koreans. I await this year's tasks with anticipation. I thank my fellow G20 leaders for their vote of confidence in Korea's ability to play the pivotal role. The G20 will continue this year its efforts to overcome the consequences of the global financial crisis and to redouble its efforts in coordinating policies toward recovery. In addition, it is time for the G20 to set the post-crisis agenda and to build a platform that will ensure the unsustained and balanced growth of the world economy in the months and years ahead. The three previous G20 summits began the search for reforms towards a more resilient financial system aimed at preventing a repeat of the recent financial crisis. However, the most immediate goal was to orchestrate the policy response to the global financial crisis and the accompanying severe economic downturn. As mentioned already, I believe it was thanks to such coordinated efforts that the world economy managed to achieve its recent stabilization. The burden of the policy response so far has fallen on public sector intervention through unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus. As the global economy finds its feet again, each G20 member country will need to consider carefully how it will implement its exit strategy, taking account of local economic conditions. This year, one of the tasks of the G20 will be to coordinate the transition to a more normal policy stance once the appropriate conditions are in place. As we make this transition towards a more normal policy stance, the G20 must shift towards putting in place the longer-term framework for policy coordination that will ensure the sustainable and balanced growth of the world economy. In particular, as chair of the G20, we will devote our energies to achieving consensus across G20 member countries for the successful implementation of the framework for strong, sustainable, and balanced growth agreed at the Pittsburgh Summit last year. In addition, an important task of the G20 is to follow up on the initiative taken at previous summits on reform of financial regulation towards a more resilient global financial system and reform of international financial institutions such as the IMF and World Bank. Concerning financial regulation, important issues include finding ways to counter the pro-cyclical nature of the financial system, as well as the problem of institutions that are too big to fail, that has received added impetus recently. We will need to follow through on the progress achieved to date, as well as find solutions for unresolved issues. Having gone through the recent financial crisis, we have been reminded of some of the weaknesses of the current system of international crisis prevention and early warning led by the international financial institutions. As we approach the Seoul Summit, we will devote our energies toward reaching agreement on a stronger and more effective early warning and surveillance mechanism at the international level. In order for the International Monetary Fund and other IFIs to fulfill their goals, it is important that they command broad support. And it goes without saying that such broad support can only be gained through the accountability and legitimacy that comes through an institution with a governance structure that is truly representative of its members. The importance of governance and representation have been affirmed by the G20 leaders in previous summits, and our goal in the November summit will be to translate the principles into concrete actions. I must not neglect to mention one more important item for the Seoul Summit, which is trade. Past G20 summits have played a pivotal role in resisting protectionist measures, and we need to reaffirm the importance of continuing our stance against protectionism. In particular, concluding the Doha Development Agenda DDA before the end of the year should be given the highest priority. The financial crisis and the economic downturn have increased the pressures for protectionism. We should be on our guard against protectionism, but at the same time, we should be mindful of the side effects of globalization that feed the antipathy toward greater global integration. We should stand ready to address legitimate concerns. To this end, a strategy of inclusive growth that permits a role for a strong social safety net should be an important companion to globalization. Looking back, it would be fair to say that the impetus for the reform of the financial system has come from the experience of the advanced countries, which was the origin of the recent financial crisis. Addressing the weaknesses in the existing framework for financial regulation is important for all of us, since the problems in one region have global repercussions. It is important to learn from recent events so as not to repeat our mistakes. However, we should not forget that there are many pressing policy and reform issues that are of paramount importance to developing countries. We will add these additional issues to the agenda for discussion at the G20 Seoul Summit in November as part of our efforts to heighten awareness and find common ground. We are planning an extensive diary of events with participation from experts and policy makers. At the November Seoul Summit, we will place development issues firmly on the agenda and work toward finding agreement. As you know, Korea is a member of the OECD grouping of developed countries, but is also a country with first-hand experience of economic development within living memory. Korea also has experience of the devastating impact of a financial crisis and the efforts necessary to secure a robust recovery. Therefore, as a country that has made the transition from one that receives aid to one that gives aid. Therefore, we will understand well what is involved in making aid work. For all these reasons, there is a great deal of significance in the fact that Korea is the first country from outside the ranks of the G8 group of advanced countries to chair the G20. I believe that Korea is well placed to share its experiences and expertise with emerging and developing countries on strategies for development and on policies for successful recovery from financial crisis. In order to achieve balanced and sustainable growth, I believe more is necessary than just achieving balance in a narrowly macroeconomic sense. A broader notion of balance is appropriate, including closing the development gap between advanced and developing countries. Such a task should be regarded as being an integral part of the mission of the G20 in achieving balanced growth of the world economy. To this end, we will consult our G20 partners in placing development issues firmly on the agenda for the Seoul G20 Summit. We have seen with the recent financial crisis the potentially devastating impact of sudden reversals of international capital flows on emerging and developing economies. At the G20 Summit in November, we will place on the agenda the establishment of what we call a global financial safety net that can put in place a global mechanism for addressing such sudden reversals. The new arrangement seeks to build on the successful implementation of bilateral arrangements between central banks for dealing with sudden reversals of capital flows and will be complementary with them. We believe that the establishment of such a financial safety net will contribute significantly toward balanced growth of the global economy. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of ensuring that the fruits of the strong and sustainable growth are shared evenly among all countries, including the poorest. To this end, the G20 must redouble its efforts to look beyond its member countries and take on the responsibility of considering a larger constituency of nations. As part of our consultation process, we will not limit our discussions to G20 member countries, but instead will reach out to partners outside the G20. We will conduct extensive outreach efforts through consultations with the United Nations and regional bodies. Our aim will be to ensure that the discussions are as inclusive as possible. As well as these outreach efforts to countries outside the G20, we will also devote our energies toward giving full scope for the impetus for recovery to come from the private sector business community, taking the baton from the government center in leading the recovery effort. As part of the initiative to highlight the role of the business community, we are currently planning the launch of the Business Summit in Seoul, timed to coincide with the November G20 Summit. Active participation from the business community will reinforce the positive outcome from the official summit itself and highlight the vitality that can only be provided by the private sector to further enhance the G20 process as an effective forum for promoting global prosperity. The world economy has stabilized through the concerted action of governments and is showing signs of recovery. But private sector investment and job creation are still far from robust. For an enduring recovery, the revitalized growth of private investment will need to follow. As part of the efforts to encourage greater role for the private sector, private priority should be given to ways of promoting job creation and investment. Fostering job creation and investment are long-term tasks that thrive in a business-friendly environment. We should find ways to reward the entrepreneurial spirit and allow creativity and initiative to play their part for the creation of jobs and wealth. We should always bear in mind that the potential long-term sustainable growth of the world economy is determined in large part by such initiatives to create jobs and wealth. The recent financial crisis has reminded us how closely our national economies are integrated in the global economy. It is not only the events in our neighbors that have an impact on our lives. The degree of integration is now such that we saw how events on the other side of the world can impact our daily lives. In this respect, the G20 is a very timely forum by bringing together not only the leading advanced economies but also the major emerging economies. The G20 has a size and scope to tackle global issues. The November summit of the G20 in Seoul can be seen as the first major test of this new global forum as its attempt to establish itself as a regular feature of the framework for international economic cooperation. I can promise you that we will put on our best efforts toward the successful conclusion of the G20 summit. In closing, let me reiterate the importance of the longer-term nature of sustained framework for international economic cooperation. Although the financial crisis brought us together and forged an effective, coordinated crisis response, it is now incumbent on us to translate the momentum we have generated towards establishing a forum that can play a genuine global leadership role for longer-term issues. To this end, we should now lower our guard or allow complacency to dull our sense of mission. One of my summit colleagues remarked at a previous meeting that we should not waste a crisis. I fully share this sentiment, and we will work toward maintaining this momentum for genuine reform. We should not forget the importance of our continued sustained efforts in achieving sustainable growth and balanced growth. I ask you to join me in this endeavor.
세계 모든 나라가 위기를
We hope
극복하고
that all of the countries around the world will overcome the economic crisis and create many jobs.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Mr. President, if I summarize maybe three key elements of your agenda, I would do it in the following way. First, reforms for creating a more resilient financial system with better international crisis prevention, early warning mechanism. I was also very pleased that you put so much emphasis on the fight against protectionism. And I just want to mention that yesterday our International Business Council published a plea not only to ask for better trade liberalization, but also highlighting the interrelationship between trade liberalization and job creation, which is so much needed today. And finally, you emphasized the need for a much more balanced economy, balanced also in terms of North and South cooperation. Now, you outlined the objectives for the G20, but the G20 was actually an ad hoc response to the global crisis. And many people ask themselves the question, what is the future of the G20? Has it become a regular feature of the world? Is it replacing the G8? And I think we all would be interested to hear your ideas, because 2010, 2011 will be important years in terms of determining also the identity of the G20. You mentioned the importance of input from the business community, from other countries, but what is your own vision about the long-term viability role of the G20?
Thank you, Mr. Schwab, for your very pertinent comments. And also, you asked a question about the future and role of G20. The November Pittsburgh G20 Summit was decided as a permanent institution. I think that this comes from the fact that the world economy has recovered more rapidly than first thought, and there is a shared view that this is due to the cooperation among the G20 countries. The G20 countries take up 80% of the total world GNP. So I think the cooperation and coordination played a very important role in the faster than thought recovery of the world economy. And also, there is a shared view that we should not fall into the trap of protectionism, because that in the past, protectionism hindered the recovery and economic development. So there is a common opinion that we should not go for the protectionism, and the Korea's stance is the same. So at present, the first task for us is to determine all the tasks to be done after the overcoming of the crisis occurred. Of course, the G8 has played a very important role in the world economy development. But, however, I think that we cannot just stop with the work of G7 countries. The G7 cooperation is not enough for us. I think there is really a consensus among developed and developing countries that we need to go further than G7, like reforming financial surveillance system, supervision system, and also the seeking for a new paradigm for economic development, and also to seek a new legitimacy for the international financial institutions and other international institutions. So to tackle all these tasks, we need more participants than just G7. So the role of G20 is very important. And also, we need to pursue a continuous and balanced economic development after the exit of the crisis. And to achieve this objective, the G20 will be the most appropriate forum, and there is consensus about that. So during the Seoul Forum, I made an intervention in this sense, namely about the role and expectations and influence of the G20 and also its responsibility. So I think it's only normal that G20 is a permanent institution.
Next year we will have France exercising the presidency of the G20 and the G8 simultaneously. Maybe this will be a good opportunity to merge the two institutions. Now, Mr. President, we are still moving out of the financial crisis, and we had many discussions where we actually stand. You mentioned in your speech that Korea has special experience in moving out of a financial crisis. Now, if you apply your experience to what we see on a global level today, what would be your recommendation?
Of course, the 1997 financial crisis in Asia is different from the current financial crisis. However, there is a common point in that we need a reform of the financial institutions and other reforms. The current financial crisis came from the problems of notably American financial institutions. Therefore, President Obama is also pursuing financial reforms. These legislations should pass the Congress and Senate, but anyway, these tasks and subjects should be dealt with in the future in the G20 forum. The past experience of Korea of the Asian financial crisis was of great help for us. So we made a presentation in this sense during the earlier G20 meeting, and also with Prime Minister alert, I published an article about the overcoming of the financial crisis. During this year, I think we'll have a very important period. The most important challenge is the reforming the international financial system. From France, as you mentioned, will be chair of G8 and at the same time G20. I think that Mr. Sarkozy agrees on the point that G20 is the most appropriate forum for the international problems. He made an intervention in this sense several times. And also, Mr. Sarkozy played a very important role in the creation of the G20 as a very important international forum. So I'm sure that the G20 chaired by France will be a very great success.
Mr. President, if I may ask you a last question. Taking your lessons from overcoming the Asian financial crisis, there were a lot of interventions, discussions here about the role of the banks. What would be your advice to the bankers here in the room?
제가 이게 의장국인 입장에서
As a chair country, I think that it is quite delicate to go into too much details on one subject. However,
아무튼 이
아,
위기를
big financial institution from an advanced country was the main cause of the current financial crisis. We cannot deny this fact. So there are so many problems to maintain the current financial system in the world. There is a consensus about that.
금융의
But when we are talking about financial reform,
너무 소극적으로 만든다.
we do not intend to reduce the role of financial system in the world. Therefore, we need to seek a balance while creating financial regulations. I think this is a very sensitive issue, but this is an issue that we cannot avoid. And also, I'd like to mention that all the
금융이 보다 더 윤리적
countries, including advanced countries, agree on the fact that the financial system should be more ethical. And also, I agree on this.
건전한 아주 건강한
We need a sound and healthy changes in the world financial system.
금융기관들 금융사업에 종사하는 분들이
The bankers and other staff in the financial institutions should not act passively in faced with this new trend. I think they have to take initiative for the reform, and this will be more efficient than the public sector government-led reforms. So we need more dialogue and conversation between the government and financial institutions.
President Lee, you have a very important responsibility this year, not only as the leader of a key country, but as the leader of the G20. We thank you for having come here to share with us, your objectives, and we wish you for this very important, because we are not yet really out of the crisis, and very important decisions have to be taken under your leadership and have to be taken maybe under more difficult circumstances, difficult in the sense as long as everybody was aware we are in the midst of the crisis, achievement of cooperation was maybe easier compared to a situation when people have the feeling we are back in a recovery and the crisis is over. But we wish you all the best for your tasks, for your leadership, and we thank you again for joining us today.